My father died on a humid Tuesday in September. I didn't cry when the lawyer told me the will left everything to my younger brother Michael, a name I'd been measured against my entire life. I didn't cry when I learned my inheritance was a single sentence. To my daughter, I leave the lesson she always needed to learn on her own. I was 24 with nothing but a degree and a rent payment due in 10 days. That was the day I stopped waiting for my family to see me. 2 decades later, Michael showed up at my door. He didn't have the money anymore. He didn't have the house. He didn't have the wife. What he had was a question no golden child ever expects to ask. I'm the daughter they disinherited, the one they called difficult because I refused to shrink. For 20 years, I built a life from scratch while my brother inherited everything: the house, the trust fund, the family narrative. Research shows that parental favoritism affects nearly half of all families, and the damage lasts decades. But no study tells you what happens when the golden child falls. Michael's question shattered the silence I fought years to create. To understand how we got here, you need to see the family that raised us, and the blueprint of favoritism that nearly broke me before I learned to walk away. My family looked ordinary from the outside. A 2-story colonial in a good school district, a father who worked in finance, a mother who ran the household like a diplomatic mission. But ordinary was the surface they polished for the world. Beneath it lived a quiet architecture of favoritism that shaped every decision, every silence, every door that closed a little faster on me than on my brother Michael. Michael was 2 years younger but somehow always first. First to be praised, first to be forgiven, first to have his future mapped out with optimism. When he brought home a B, my mother said he was finding his stride. When I brought home an A, she said it was expected. That small difference, repeated 1,000 times, became the foundation of everything. Research from Cornell University shows that between 2/3 and 3/4 of mothers have a favorite child, and the children know it. The disfavored child grows up with higher rates of depression, lower self-esteem, and a persistent sense that love is conditional. I didn't need a study to tell me that. I lived it. My father, Paul, avoided conflict the way some people avoid crowds. He let my mother set the emotional thermostat. He paid for my college tuition without enthusiasm and paid for Michael's graduate degree with pride. When I asked why, he said Michael needed the support more because he was still figuring things out. I had been figuring things out since I was 12. That apparently meant I didn't need anything from anyone. My mother, Denise, was the architect. She had a gift for making exclusion feel like concern. If I wasn't invited to a family dinner, it was because she didn't want to overwhelm me. If my accomplishments were mentioned at all, they were framed as solitary achievements that didn't require celebration because I was independent. Independence, in her vocabulary, meant I had no right to ask for support. Michael absorbed the benefits without noticing the cost. He was charming, easygoing, the kind of person who walked into a room and assumed it was glad to see him. He didn't create the system that favored him. He just accepted it the way a fish accepts water. When I tried to talk to him about it once, he laughed and said I was too serious. That was his role: to deflect, to smooth things over, to make my complaints sound like overreactions. The inheritance arrived like a verdict. I was 24, working my first job at a small law firm, paying off student loans. My father had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 3 months earlier. He died quickly, but not so quickly that he couldn't sign papers. The will was read in a conference room that smelled like old carpet and stale coffee. Michael received the house, the investment portfolio, a life insurance policy worth just under $1 million, and a letter from my father that I never got to see. I received a single check for $20,000 and a note that read, "To my daughter, I leave the lesson she always needed to learn on her own." I sat in that conference room and felt something inside me go still. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. They had spent my entire life teaching me where I stood. Now they had put it in writing. My mother called that evening to explain. She said my father believed Michael would need the resources more because he had a family to start, a future to build, a trajectory that required support. I asked what I was supposed to build with nothing. She said I had always been resourceful. That word again. Independent, resourceful, alone. I didn't go to the funeral. I couldn't. Standing in a room full of people who had watched me be reduced for decades while pretending not to see it, that would have broken me. Instead, I sent flowers, blocked my mother's number, and started the long process of rebuilding from zero. The $20,000 went to moving expenses and a security deposit on a studio apartment in Washington, D.C. I took a job with the U.S. Attorney's Office that paid less than I deserved, but offered something more valuable: a structure that rewarded clarity and effort regardless of who you were related to. The first year was brutal. I worked 14-hour days. I ate dinner standing over a sink. I learned how to argue cases in front of judges who didn't care about my family name because they had never heard it. That was the freedom I had been missing my whole life. A system where the rules applied equally to everyone. While I was grinding, Michael was spending. He bought a house he couldn't afford. He invested in business ventures that looked good on paper but collapsed in practice. He married a woman who liked the idea of wealth more than the work of building it. My mother watched and approved because he was still her golden child, and golden children don't fail. They stumble and then they recover. But the recovery never came. By the time I was 34, I had made senior attorney. I had a reputation for preparation and precision. I had a small apartment that felt like mine, a circle of friends who didn't know my family's story, a life that I had built without asking permission from anyone. I was happy, not loudly, not performatively, just quietly and completely. And then Michael showed up. He called from a number I didn't recognize. When I heard his voice, I almost hung up, but something in his tone stopped me. The confidence was gone. The easiness had been replaced by something raw. He said he needed to talk. He said he had made mistakes. He said he didn't have anywhere else to go. I listened. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I told him I would think about it and hung up. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I've learned the full story. The house was foreclosed. The investments were gone. His wife left him. My mother had stopped answering his calls. The golden child had hit rock bottom, and everyone who had built the pedestal had vanished the moment he fell. Now he's standing in my doorway, and I have a choice that I never expected to face: help the brother who took everything, or walk away the way they walked away from me. But before I tell you what I decided, you need to understand exactly what happened in the years between his inheritance and his collapse. Because the story of how Michael lost everything is not just about bad luck. It's about a system of favoritism that taught him he could never fail, and then punished him the first time reality didn't cooperate. Michael didn't just show up empty-handed. He showed up hollow. The brother who once commanded every room now struggled to hold eye contact. He stood in my doorway wearing a jacket that had been expensive 5 years ago and shoes that had been repaired twice. His hands were shaking slightly. I invited him in. Over the next 3 hours, I got the full accounting, not just of money lost, but of a life built on borrowed stability. After my father died, Michael inherited roughly $1.2 million in assets. The house was valued at $600,000. The investments added another $400,000. The life insurance policy paid out nearly $1 million more. Total estate, about $2 million after taxes. I received $20,000. That first year, Michael did what golden children do when they inherit sudden wealth. He expanded. He bought a 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood that impressed his friends, financed with a mortgage he didn't need because the cash could have paid for it outright. He invested $200,000 in a restaurant venture run by a college friend who had never managed a business. He bought a luxury SUV. He took his new wife on a honeymoon that cost $40,000. My mother encouraged every decision. She told him he deserved to enjoy the fruits of his inheritance. She said my father would have wanted him to live well. She never once suggested he consult a financial advisor, set aside an emergency fund, or slow down enough to understand what he actually had. The restaurant failed in 14 months. The friend disappeared with the remaining capital. Michael lost the entire $200,000 and owed another $60,000 to suppliers. He paid it out of the investment portfolio, which had already been diminished by taxes and spending. Year 2, he tried real estate. He bought a rental property in a market he didn't understand, overpaid, and couldn't find tenants who paid on time. After 18 months of carrying the mortgage and legal fees from evictions, he sold at a loss of $90,000. Year 3, he started a consulting firm. He had no background in consulting. He had a degree in communications that he had never used, but he had confidence, and confidence had always been enough before. He rented office space. He hired a receptionist. He printed business cards and branded materials. He gave presentations about synergy and innovation and told himself that success was just around the corner. The firm generated $23,000 in total revenue over 2 years. It cost him $300,000 to operate. Here's what I learned from research after he told me all this. 20% of American adults say they've experienced significant sibling estrangement rooted in parental favoritism. The golden child, the one who receives the disproportionate share of affection and resources, often develops what psychologists call fragile self-esteem. They believe they are special not because of their actions, but because of their position. When that position is removed, they have no internal foundation to fall back on. Michael never learned how to fail. My parents had protected him from every consequence. When he missed a deadline, they extended it. When he overspent, they covered it. When he made bad choices, they reframed them as learning experiences. I had been learning experiences since I was 12. He had never been required to learn anything at all. The marriage cracked under the weight. His wife, Alicia, had married the idea of Michael more than the reality. She liked the parties, the status, the easy charm. She did not like the collection letters, the shrinking bank accounts, the late-night arguments about money she didn't want to believe was running out. When the house went into pre-foreclosure, she left. She filed for divorce 2 weeks after the bank notice arrived. The settlement cost him another $200,000. My mother stopped answering his calls around the same time. He told me this quietly, like a confession that hurt more than the financial losses. She told him she couldn't be involved in his financial problems. She said it was too stressful. She said he needed to figure it out on his own. The same woman who had spent 30 years teaching him he was the center of the universe had now decided she couldn't watch the center collapse. By year 5, Michael had nothing. The house was foreclosed. The investments were liquidated. The credit cards were maxed. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood he used to make fun of. He took a job selling insurance, the kind where you cold call people during dinner hours. He lasted 8 months. He said the rejections felt personal in a way he couldn't handle. Year 6, he tried to rebuild. He found work at a car dealership, sales again. He was good at the charm part but terrible at the follow-through. His numbers were average. He was let go after a year. He bounced between jobs, each one a little lower, each one a little harder to keep. The pattern was the same. He would start with enthusiasm, hit the first obstacle, and collapse inward. I sat across from him in my living room and listened to all of this without interrupting. I felt something complex moving through me, not satisfaction, not pity either. It was more like recognition. The system that had held him up had let him go the moment he stopped being useful to the story. He was learning what I had known since I was a child. Love in our family was conditional. He had just taken 30 years longer to discover it. But then he told me something that changed everything. He said my mother had called him after the foreclosure, not to offer help, to tell him she was revising her will. She wanted him to know that he wouldn't be inheriting anything further. She said she needed to protect herself. She said she had already given him everything. I asked him what that meant for me. He looked at the floor. He said, "She told me you weren't in the will at all. She said you had walked away from the family, and she was respecting that choice by removing you completely." I had walked away from the family, yes, but I had never asked for anything. I had never contested the inheritance. I had simply left, and my mother had used that exit as justification for erasing me entirely. That was the pivot. In that moment, I understood that my mother had not just been partial. She had been actively constructing a narrative where my absence was my fault, where Michael's failure was his burden, and where she bore no responsibility for any of it. Michael looked up at me and said the words I had never expected to hear from him. He said, "I'm sorry, I should have seen it. I should have defended you. I was too comfortable to notice." Those were the first honest words he had ever spoken to me, and they made the decision I was about to face infinitely harder than it already was. You see, I had spent 20 years building walls. I had made peace with being alone. I had constructed a life where no one from my past could reach me. And now Michael, the person who had taken everything, was sitting in my living room, broken, and apologizing. He wasn't asking for money yet. He was asking for something worse. He was asking me to see him as a person instead of a category. But here's what he didn't know. While he was losing everything, I had been secretly investigating my father's will. Something about the timing had never sat right with me. My father died of pancreatic cancer, yes, but the will was signed 3 weeks before his death, while he was heavily medicated and not fully lucid. A nurse at the hospice had mentioned to me afterward that she remembered visitors during that period. She remembered my mother bringing a lawyer. She remembered my father being too weak to read the documents placed in front of him. I had never pursued it. I had told myself it was over, that fighting would only drag me back into the family machinery. But Michael's arrival changed the equation. If the will was contested successfully, everything would be reopened. The house, the investments, the insurance money, all of it would be redistributed, and Michael would be entitled to nothing if the court found evidence of undue influence. But that would also mean dragging my mother into court, exposing her, making public what had been private for decades, and it would force Michael to choose between his inheritance and the last shred of his relationship with her. I had a choice to make, but I needed more information first. I needed to see the original will documents. I needed to speak to the lawyer who had drafted them, and I needed to understand whether what I suspected was true or whether I was just seeing patterns that weren't there. Michael didn't know any of this yet. He was sitting on my couch waiting for me to say something, anything, that would tell him whether I was going to let him back into my life or close the door forever. I took a breath. I told him I needed time. I told him he could stay for 3 nights, no more. I told him I would think about what he had said and what it meant, and whether there was anything left between us worth rebuilding. He nodded, he thanked me. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. That night, after he fell asleep on my pull-out couch, I made a phone call to a woman named Eleanor Vance. She was a retired probate attorney who had worked in DC for 40 years. She had been a mentor to me early in my career, and she knew more about contested wills and family, estate litigation than almost anyone I had ever met. Eleanor answered on the second ring. I told her the broad strokes of the story. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that sent a chill down my spine. She said, "Get me the original documents. If what you're describing is accurate, your mother may have committed fraud. And if she did, she didn't just cheat you out of money. She cheated you out of a legal right to be treated fairly. That's the kind of thing that, once proven, strips a person of credibility in any court." I asked her what the chances were of proving undue influence 20 years later. She said, "It depends on what the evidence shows. But in cases where a parent was medicated, where the will deviates dramatically from previous estate plans, and where the excluded child was deliberately kept in the dark, courts have overturned distributions even decades later." I hung up feeling something I couldn't name. Not hope, not rage, just the heavy certainty that I was about to enter a battle I had never wanted. But this time, I wasn't fighting alone. And this time, I had the law on my side. The next morning, Michael woke up and found me already dressed. I told him we needed to talk. He sat down at the kitchen table. I poured coffee for both of us, and then I told him what I suspected about the will. The color drained from his face. He said, "Do you really think she would do that?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him, and I saw the moment when the last piece of the golden child illusion fell away. He realized that the mother who had loved him unconditionally had also manipulated him, had used him as a weapon against me, had built her entire legacy on a foundation that might be legally rot. He put his head in his hands. He said, "What do we do now?" I told him the truth. We find the lawyer. We get the documents. We decide whether we're willing to burn down the family to find out what it was really made of. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Respect. He said, "I'm with you." That was the moment everything shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. But the person standing beside me was the very person who had once been the source of my deepest wounds, and trusting him might turn out to be the biggest mistake of my life, or the only way I finally got the truth. The next morning, Michael and I drove to the office of Harold Crane, the lawyer who drafted my father's will. I had called ahead but didn't mention details. I wanted to see his face when we walked in. Crane was in his late 70s, still practicing from a cluttered office in Georgetown. The shelves were lined with leather-bound volumes that looked more decorative than functional. He seemed surprised to see me, then alarmed when Michael stepped in behind me. I asked for a copy of the original will file. He hesitated. He said he needed to check with my mother first, since she was the executor. I told him I had a right to see the documents as a named beneficiary. He fumbled through excuses, then finally admitted the file was no longer in his possession. My mother had requested it 3 years ago. He had given her the only complete copy. That should have been impossible. Standard practice requires attorneys to keep estate records for at least 10 years. Crane knew that. I watched him avoid eye contact while he explained that he had made an exception. I asked why. He said my mother had been very insistent. On the drive back, Michael was quiet. Then he said she's been planning this for a long time. Not just the will, the cover-up too. I called Alina Vance and told her what Crane had said. She swore under her breath. Then she told me something that changed the direction of everything. She said, if your mother took the original file, she was either destroying evidence or building a narrative. Either way, you need to find the electronic trail. The will was drafted on a computer. There will be metadata. There will be drafts. There will be emails. That afternoon, we hired a forensic document examiner. It cost $3,000, money I had saved for a new furnace. I paid it without hesitation. The examiner's report came back in 4 days. It contained 2 significant findings. First, the final will document was created after my father's death, not before. The metadata showed the file was created on October 12th. My father died on October 5th. Second, the digital signature was a scanned image, not an original electronic signature. It had been inserted into the document. I read the report 3 times. Then I called Alina again. She said, this is fraud, clear, provable fraud. The will is invalid. The estate needs to be reopened. But reopening the estate meant confronting my mother directly. It meant filing a petition in probate court. It meant public records, depositions, and testimony. And it meant that Michael would have to testify against his own mother. He agreed to do it. I didn't ask twice. I watched him make the decision, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Not guilt, not obligation, resolve. The petition was filed the following Monday. The grounds were undue influence and fraud. We requested that the original will be declared void and that the estate be redistributed according to my father's previous estate plan from 2 years before his death. We also requested that my mother be removed as executor and replaced by a neutral third party. The court scheduled a hearing for 6 weeks out. Those 6 weeks were the longest of my life. My mother hired a lawyer, a good one. He filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the statute of limitations had expired, but Alina had anticipated that. She cited a legal precedent that fraud claims have no statute of limitations when the fraud was actively concealed from the aggrieved party. The judge denied the motion. Then the countermove started. My mother's lawyer issued subpoenas for my financial records, my employment history, my medical records. They were trying to discredit me, to paint me as a vindictive daughter who had turned against her family out of spite. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. I had lived clean for 20 years, but the invasion still hurt. Michael was deposed first. He sat in a conference room with lawyers from both sides and told the truth about everything. About the favoritism, about the way our parents treated us differently, about the phone calls where our mother encouraged him to spend while mocking my frugality. He admitted he had never questioned the will. He admitted he had assumed it was fair because it benefited him. He admitted he was ashamed. The deposition transcript was 73 pages long. I read every page. When I got to his closing statement, I stopped. He said I was the golden child, and I used that position to never look at the damage around me. My sister paid the price for my comfort, and I am deeply sorry. I cried for the first time in years. Not because I forgave him, because I finally believed he understood. The hearing date arrived on a gray November morning. My mother sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. She was dressed impeccably, her hair done, her expression composed. She looked like a woman who believed she could still control the room. She was wrong. The evidence was presented methodically. The metadata report, the examiner's testimony, The nurse from the hospice who testified that my father could not lift a pen during the week the will was supposedly signed. She remembered the date because it was her wedding anniversary. She was certain. My mother's lawyer tried to cross-examine the nurse. He asked how she could be so sure after 20 years. She said, "Because I watched that man struggle to lift a glass of water. There is no way he signed a legal document that week. I would stake my career on it." The judge adjourned for an hour. When he returned, he delivered his ruling. The will was invalid. All distributions made under it were void. The estate would be reopened. A new executor would be appointed. And the assets, including the house, the investments, and the insurance money, would be redistributed according to the previous estate plan. That previous plan divided everything equally between my mother, Michael, and me, 1/3 each. My mother's face went white. She stood up and walked out without speaking. I didn't watch her leave. I was too focused on the judge's next words. He said, "This court finds evidence of deliberate fraud by the named executor. I am referring this matter to the State Bar Association and to the District Attorney's Office for further investigation." My mother was not just losing control of the estate, she was facing potential criminal charges. Michael reached over and put his hand on my arm. He said, "It's over." But it wasn't over, not really. The legal victory was one thing, the emotional cost was another. My mother would never speak to me again. Michael's relationship with her was shattered. The family was gone, not just estranged, but legally, ethically, permanently broken. And I had a choice to make about what to do with the money. The estate was valued at roughly $3 million, including the original assets and appreciation on the house. My share was approximately $1 million. Michael's share was the same. My mother's share was also the same, but she was ordered to pay legal fees from her portion, which reduced it by nearly half. The day the checks arrived, Michael and I sat in my living room. He looked at the number on his check and said, "This doesn't feel like mine." I agreed, it didn't feel like mine either. That's when I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I didn't keep the money. I didn't split it with Michael. I did something that neither my mother nor my father would have understood. I created a foundation, a legal fund for children who had been written out of their parents' wills, a way to turn the machinery of inheritance into a tool of justice instead of control. Michael donated half of his share to the same foundation. He kept the rest to start fresh. We agreed that none of the money would go to our mother. The foundation launched quietly 6 months later. Within 2 years, it had funded 12 cases. Within 5, it had become a national resource. I still run it today. But this story isn't about the foundation. It's about what happened to the family that couldn't survive the truth, and about the brother who finally became a person after 2 decades of being an idea. Michael and I are not close. We see each other twice a year. We talk on the phone once a month. The wounds are too deep for easy healing, but he is the only family I have left. And when I look at him now, I don't see the golden child who took everything. I see a man who lost everything and found the courage to rebuild, not with money, with integrity. That's the lesson my father's death taught me. Inheritance is not love. Money is not proof. And the only justice worth fighting for is the kind that leaves no one silent in the dark. The courtroom victory changed everything, but it changed nothing. My mother's criminal investigation took 14 months. The state bar suspended her from any fiduciary role permanently. The district attorney declined to prosecute due to her age and lack of prior record. She escaped jail time, but lost every scrap of social standing she had spent a lifetime building. She moved to a retirement community in Florida. She never spoke to me again. She never spoke to Michael either. She sent one letter, addressed to both of us, saying that we had destroyed the family and that she hoped we were satisfied. I read it once and filed it away. Michael burned his copy. The house where I grew up was sold. The proceeds were divided according to the original estate plan. I used my share to seed the foundation. Michael used his to pay off debts and rent a small apartment. He started working at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated people find housing. He told me it was the first job that ever felt meaningful. I didn't believe him at first. I had spent too many years watching him take the easy path, but I watched him stay at that job for 3 years, then 5, then 7. He never asked me for money. He never complained about the salary. He just showed up every day and did work that mattered. The foundation grew faster than I expected. Within the first year, we funded 23 cases. Within 3 years, over 100. I hired a small team. We focused on cases where children had been written out of wills after a parent's mental decline, where undue influence was suspected, where siblings had been pitted against each other by a controlling parent. Every case reminded me of my own. Every client carried the same quiet rage, the same exhaustion, the same desperate need to be seen. I told them all the same thing. The money is not the point. The point is that the silence ends with you. Michael and I found a rhythm. We met for coffee once a month. We talked about work, about books, about nothing important. We never talked about our mother. We never talked about the years we lost. We didn't need to. The absence of those conversations became its own kind of understanding. Then, 8 years after the trial, a letter arrived. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. The envelope was thick and official. I opened it standing in my kitchen and read the first paragraph twice before I understood what it was saying. My mother had died 3 weeks earlier. Her will was being read, and she had left me something after all. I drove to Michael's apartment. He opened the door and I handed him the letter without speaking. He read it, sat down slowly, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. The letter explained that our mother had maintained a separate trust account for decades. It was funded with money from her side of the family, money my father never knew about. She had added to it over the years, quietly, without telling anyone. The trust was valued at $1.2 million. She had divided it equally between Michael and me. I sat on his couch and tried to process what this meant. She had spent her entire life favoring him, manipulating us, lying to protect her version of the family, and in the end, she had left us exactly equal shares. No explanation, no apology, just the numbers. Michael spoke first. He said, "I think she was trying to tell us something, or maybe she was trying to fix something she couldn't fix." I didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. Grateful that she had finally acknowledged me in the only language she knew. Furious that she had waited until she was dead to do it. I told Michael I needed time to think about what to do with the money. He said the same. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about the strange arc of my family. The father who left me a lesson instead of love. The mother who spent decades building walls and then left a door open after she was gone. The brother who took everything, lost everything, and became someone I could finally respect. I decided to take the money and add it to the foundation, not because I didn't need it, because using it that way was the only response that honored the complexity of what had happened. I wasn't forgiving my mother. I wasn't forgetting what she did, but I was refusing to let her final act define me. Michael used his half to buy a small house. He sent me a photo of the front door. He had painted it blue. He said it was the first thing he had ever owned that felt like his choice, not his inheritance. We still meet for coffee once a month. He's gray now. So am I. We talk about our lives, about the foundation, about the weather. Sometimes we sit in silence and it doesn't feel heavy. Last month, he told me something I had never heard before. He said that after our father died, before the will was read, our mother had taken him aside and told him that I didn't want anything from the estate. She said I had told her I was too independent to accept family money. He believed her. I asked him when he realized it wasn't true. He said, about 3 years after the trial, when I finally understood how much she had manipulated all of us. I nodded. I didn't say I forgave him. I didn't say I blamed him. I just sat there, across the table from the only person in the world who understood exactly what it cost to survive that family. And for a moment, that was enough. The foundation now operates in 12 states. We have helped over 400 families. We do not take cases that are petty. We do not take cases driven by greed. We take cases where someone was erased, where the system was used as a weapon, where the silence of one child was assumed to be consent. Every year, I speak at a conference for estate lawyers. I tell them the same thing I'm telling you. Inheritance is not love. Money is not proof. And the only justice worth fighting for is the kind that leaves no one silent in the dark. But there's one detail I never share in those speeches. One thing I keep private. Something I found in my mother's safety deposit box after she died, along with the trust documents. A photograph, old, creased, yellowed. It was taken when I was 6 years old. I am sitting on my father's lap. My mother is kneeling beside us. Michael is a baby in her arms. We are all laughing. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, are 3 words: I love you. I have kept that photograph in a drawer for 8 years. I have looked at it maybe 4 times. Each time, I feel something I can't name. Not forgiveness, not anger, just the strange weight of a truth I will never fully understand. The people who hurt us are rarely villains. They are broken people who broke us in turn. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is not to reconcile with them, but to refuse to let their brokenness become your own. That is the real inheritance, not the money, the choice, and I choose to stop the silence here. I choose to stop the silence here, not because the story is finished, but because the part that matters most is what you take from it. Research tells us that nearly half of all families have a golden child dynamic. Half of you watching right now have felt the weight of being the one who was seen less, loved conditionally, or written out of the narrative. The numbers are staggering. The cost is invisible. But here is what the numbers don't capture. The moment you stop translating neglect into love, the moment you stop accepting silence as a substitute for belonging, something shifts. You don't just survive the system. You build something outside it. You become the author of your own inheritance. The lingering question is not what happened to my mother, or what Michael did with his second chance. The question is what you will do with the story you just heard. Will you keep it as a distant tale of a broken family, or will you let it change the way you see your own life? If you are the person who was always told you were too much, too independent, too difficult to love, consider that those labels might have been the price of being real in a system that preferred performance. If you are the golden child who never questioned the pedestal, ask yourself who stood in the shadow of your comfort. And if you are a parent, examine the stories you are telling your children about who they are allowed to become. The silence ends when one person refuses to carry it any further. That person can be you, not by declaring war on your family, not by demanding apologies that may never come, but by deciding that your worth does not depend on being chosen first, by choosing yourself for the life you actually want. The foundation I built continues to grow. Michael is still doing his quiet work. We still meet once a month. The photograph stays in the drawer. Some wounds do not heal. They just become part of the landscape. And the landscape can still be beautiful, even with its scars. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to know they are not alone. Leave a comment about what you would have done in my place. And subscribe if you believe that some truths are worth telling, even when the telling costs everything. Because the only inheritance worth passing on is the courage to stop pretending. Your story matters. Tell it.